Okay, let me have you turn to Mark chapter 8. Mark 8. I want to consider a story from Mark chapter 8 this morning. A story that probably most, maybe all of you have read, and it probably seemed a bit confusing maybe at first sight. But I hope that this morning, as we kind of think through it, and we consider maybe some of the context surrounding it, and also some other matters through the rest of the Bible that help us see this text in a clearer way. And I want to consider really this healing of this blind man in Bethsaida here in Mark chapter 8. And the section is starting in verse 22 through verse 26. So if you look with me here, Mark 8, starting in verse 22, and I'm going to read just a few verses here, the story of this man. It says, "And they came to Bethsaida." So this is Jesus with his disciples. They came to Bethsaida, and some people brought to him a blind man and begged him to touch him. And he took the blind man by the hand and led him out of the village. And when he had spit on his eyes and laid his hands on him, he asked him, "Do you see anything?" And he looked up and said, "I see people, but they look like trees walking." Then Jesus laid his hands on his eyes again, and he opened his eyes, and his sight was restored, and he saw everything clearly. And he sent him home, saying, "Do not even enter the village." How many of you have read this section in your Bibles? Okay. Let me just ask you before I kind of really say anything here. Any thoughts that you might have in regards to this? I mean, I'm not looking here for interpretation. I'm just looking for, what do you think when you read this? What is this passage saying? What story does it tell? What does it mean? What is the intent behind it? Is it odd? Maybe that's a simpler question to ask at first. Is it odd? I find it odd. I remember reading this passage almost every time I've ever read it up until this week, and I got to the end of it and thought, I have no idea what's going on there. It's just weird, just confusing. I don't understand what's going on here. Does anybody have anything that they think as they read this text? Anything at all? You don't have to, but just wondering, Well, I would like to offer you a thought on this text this morning. I heard a preacher at one point. He was preaching on a different topic, and I can't even remember what it was at this point. So I would like to go back and find exactly what he said. But he was preaching on something else, and it was like a one-sentence statement. And he was clearly making, his statement was coming from this passage. Because the words he used, I knew he was referencing this very particular passage, this healing of this blind man. But the way that he said it almost as though it gave me the key to unlock this thing and be able to see it in a way that I hadn't seen it before. And it opened my mind as to potentially how to view this text. And so I came to it and I started reading it, and it was like this thing that brought me such confusion before. It really wasn't as confusing as it used to have been. And so I want to give you a few thoughts this morning about what this text might be about. Now, I'll just say this at the beginning because I think it's important to just make this clear. Whether what I have to say this morning is actually what Mark intended us to get out of this passage or not, that's a harder question to answer. What I will say is that what I am going to bring out from this text, and I hope that you will see this and agree with this, is that what I will bring out, I think, is at minimum a very fair application of this text to our lives. So I hope that you will see, because I'm going to make a point here that I do think this is what Mark intended us to see, what I lay out for you. I do think Mark wants us to see the text in this light, and I'll make my case for that. But even if it's not what Mark actually intended with this text, I'm certain that you will find some encouragement here regardless in the way that we apply the text to ourselves. So let me just start to give you some introductory thoughts here. The passage is definitely pretty unique. I can't think of anywhere else where there's a miracle that's done by Jesus that seems to be progressive. That it happens in stages. If you go through all of the Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, at least to my knowledge, you're not going to find any other miracle that seems to take place progressively or in stages. All the miracles that happen, the result is immediate. And the question that I want you to just think about, and maybe you already are thinking about that, maybe when we read the text, that was the first thing in your mind, is why is that? Why is this thing happening in stages? Why is it progressive? Why does it almost seem like Jesus heals the guy halfway and then he has to do something else to heal him again? Why is that happening? Jesus heals people all throughout the Gospels, and furthermore, Jesus heals other blind people throughout the Gospels. This is not the only place where somebody blind is healed, but it never happens in stages. It's never progressive, except for in this story. Even just a little bit later in Mark chapter 10, I'm not going to read the whole story, but just a little bit later in Mark chapter 10, you get another healing of a blind man. We usually call this story, this guy's named Blind Bartimaeus. And if you remember that story, you have this blind beggar. He's coming, he seeks out Jesus, and he's there, and he's sort of crying out to Jesus, right? And then his disciples and these other people, they come, and they rebuke Bartimaeus, and they basically tell him, be quiet, right? And what does he do? You remember what Bartimaeus does? It says that he does? Yeah, he shouted out all the more, right? He just cries out even louder, right? And at the end of the story, Jesus heals this man, Bartimaeus, this blind man, and it actually very specifically says, and immediately he recovered his sight. So you get this immediate healing that takes place, and that's sort of the standard procedure when you read the Gospels and you see the miracles of Jesus. And you have another man in John chapter 9. If you remember this story, the disciples come to Jesus and they ask him, Rabbi, who sinned that this man was born blind, right? They ask, is it his parents that sinned, or did this man sin? Why is he blind? And Jesus responds, it was not that this man sinned or his parents, but rather that the works of God might be displayed. So you get that scene, and then Jesus anoints the man's eyes with mud, and he tells him, go wash in the pool of Siloam. And it says in the text, and he went and washed, and he came back seeing. So he could immediately see as he did the thing that Jesus told him to do. He didn't come back seeing partially. He didn't come back seeing with blurry vision or distorted vision. In fact, if you remember, the man tells the Jewish leaders, one thing I know, that though I was blind, now I see, right? The man could see, and he could see clearly. So you have other examples. If you go through the Gospels, you see other examples of Jesus healing blind people, and yet no other examples that look like this. No other examples that follow this pattern, where it comes in stages. And the question, again, that I always ask myself is why? Why is this like this? And so let me ask you a different question which I think might help us start to work our way into what maybe this passage means, or at least a fair application of the passage. How about this question? When Jesus heals these other people of blindness throughout the Gospels, those are true events that took place. Jesus really did heal these people of blindness. They're not just stories to tell some metaphorical truth. They're real historical events. But what I want you to just think about for a minute is when Jesus heals these blind people throughout the Gospels, what might we consider them a picture of? When Jesus heals the blind man in John chapter 9, and the man says, "I was blind, but now I see," what does that sort of portray to us? What is that an image of in a way? Go ahead. Yes. You're on it.
Yeah, I don't know what to say. Just when you see spiritual, like
yeah.
Your eyes are open.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's really in a way just a simple image of salvation, isn't it? Right? And to so much so that we have songs written about this, right? John Newton wrote his song, Amazing Grace, and I wouldn't doubt that most people in the world probably think that I once was blind, but now I see is a John Newton original. And it's not a John Newton original. God said that in His Word, right? This man that Jesus heals in John 9, He says that. That's a Bible verse. That's not a John Newton verse. But my point is, we look at that and we see those other stories and we think, those are pictures of salvation, aren't they? That we can see that through the Bible, going from blindness to seeing, that's an image of salvation, right? Again, I'm not saying that those events were not real events and they're just telling allegorical stories. They were real events. People really were healed of blindness. But there's a reason why John Newton put that in his song about salvation. Because we look at that and we can go, I can resonate with that, right? Maybe you weren't physically blind, but you were spiritually blind, right? And your eyes were open to spiritual things, just like Erica said. But if all of those other images in the Bible of people healed of blindness, going from not being able to see to being able to see, are pictures of salvation in a way, they represent salvation in a way, then what in the world is going on with this guy in Mark 8? Because if all these other things are, it's a miracle that takes place where someone goes from blindness to seeing in a moment, then how do we understand this guy in Mark 8? What can his story portray? And I would say this to you, that if all of these other stories are in a way representations of salvation and the immediacy of going from total darkness to seeing, right? If they sort of represent salvation in a way, then I want to make the point to you that I think this man in Mark 8 is a representation of not just salvation, but of the Christian life as a whole. Now, let me explain to you why I'm making that point. That he's not just a representation of salvation, but he is a representation of the Christian life as a whole. Let's just think about the scene that unfolds here for a minute. What happens? If you're there in Mark 8, the first thing that happens is that this man is brought to Jesus by other people. The other people, they bring this man to Jesus, and the other people are the ones that beg this man, or that beg Jesus to heal this man. We actually don't hear anything from him at all until Jesus asks him whether or not he sees. We don't hear anything about the guy when he first shows up to Jesus. And brethren, I want you to just think for a minute. Is this not the truth when it comes to salvation? Is it not the case that more often than not, others are bringing people to Jesus and begging them to have mercy on other people, on those who they love? It's not often the case that the individual comes themselves. It is more often the case, and probably the case for every single one of you in this room, that somebody else was going to Jesus and begging Jesus for you. They brought you before Jesus in prayer, and they were going to Him and asking Him to heal you spiritually. Maybe you didn't know about it. Maybe you didn't know that it was taking place, or you didn't know how long it was taking place, but it's very likely that there was somebody who was bringing you before Jesus and asking Jesus to heal you. And all of you are constantly bringing people before Jesus to ask Him to heal them. Are you not? You are all, I'm in the prayer meetings with you all. I know that you are all sitting in these prayer meetings and you're praying to God to open the eyes of the blind. And it's just like the scene's taking place. It's like you're bringing your friend up to Jesus and you're saying, Jesus, open his eyes, right? And that person's not saying anything to Jesus, but here you are standing next to this person who you're bringing to Jesus, your loved one, your friend, whatever, and you're asking Jesus to open this person's eyes. And in this story, Jesus responds to these friends, and He does what they ask. He opens their friends' eyes. And in our own life, brethren, God responds. God responds to us when we do this. And so this man, just continuing here, just thinking about what happens, right? These friends, they bring this friend to Jesus, and they ask on behalf of their friend that Jesus would heal him, right? So the man, he's brought before Jesus, and he's blind. And now here's an interesting thing I want you to think about for a minute, right? Although we might not think so as we read the text initially, there is a miracle that takes place immediately, okay? You have to think here, brethren. This guy goes from seeing absolutely nothing, blind, dark. He doesn't see anything. He is totally blind. He can't see anything, and he goes to seeing people. Now, granted, his vision is pretty distorted. I will grant you that, right? His vision is really messed up. He does not see clearly, right? He sees men, but he says they look like trees walking. Now, you're not supposed to see like that. That's not clear vision, right? But brethren, he sees something, right? You have to catch that. This is a man who didn't see anything. He saw nothing. And now he sees men walking, and they look like trees. His vision is pretty well distorted, but he saw nothing, and now he sees something. Now, I don't know what you call that, but I'd be pretty hard-pressed to not consider that a miracle. Because, look, let me give you an example, right? And I know we live in an age where you could find online these people who want to claim miracles, and it's like, oh, my back is sore, and then the guy touches your back, and it's like, oh, my back is perfect now, right? And there's nothing really miraculous about it, or it just seems so small and insignificant that, what is this? I don't understand how is this miraculous work, right? And we could maybe come to this story and go, oh man, well, Jesus, there was no miracle that took place, and it took Jesus 2 tries to get the miracle going. Well, listen, brethren, look, if you were in a horrible accident and you lost your arm all the way up to your shoulder, right? So you had their arm was gone, okay? And we all prayed for you, and your arm grew back to this point, but you didn't have a hand and you didn't have fingers, right? What would you say that was? I mean, I don't know what else you would consider that. If you did not have an arm, and then we prayed for you, and your arm grew, but you just didn't have a hand at the end of it, I will grant you that it might not seem as complete as you might hope it would be, but that's not normal, right? If you don't have an arm, and then an arm appears, that's not just normal stuff. That's not normal operation of the universe. That's like miraculous stuff. Now, yes, I grant you'd probably like to have a hand and some fingers too, but If you didn't have an arm and now you got an arm, there's a miracle that took place there, for sure. For sure there is. And brethren, when you see this man go from total darkness, none of you in here have ever been blind before, so you don't know what that's like, but just close your eyes, right? And you can't see anything, and then open your eyes. This man goes from total darkness to seeing something. He sees something. It's a miracle for sure, for sure. And so this man, although he does experience some form of a miracle, his vision is still distorted. He does not see everything as clearly as he could see them. And let me just say, brethren, I think that if you'd be willing to accept this, this is a good picture, I think, of the Christian as he comes into the kingdom of God. You are made capable to see something that you could not see before. You couldn't see anything before. You were through and through blind, total darkness. And as a Christian, as someone is born again and enters into the kingdom of God, they are capable of seeing something of God when they saw nothing before. Again, their vision is not yet as clear as it could be, not yet as clear even as it should be. Now, it's a lot clearer than it was before. As you come into the kingdom of God, you're seeing things way clearer than you did before. But I don't think it's quite as clear as it should be or as it could be. And so what has to be done? Well, for this man, he needs Jesus to clear some of this up, right? He needs Jesus to fix his distorted vision. He's got to come to him for help, to have him, to allow him to see clearly. And brethren, this is the reality with the Christian life. We have to come again and again and again to Jesus if we are going to have our vision focused rightly upon God, if we are going to see clearly spiritual matters, how we should view God, how we should view the world, all things pertaining to life and godliness, we are going to have to continually come to Jesus that we might see these things clearer and clearer. And brethren, this is why I find this man to be such a great example of the progression of the Christian life as a whole. Because you have for sure this imagery of salvation. In a way, this man goes from total blindness to being able to see something that he never saw before. But you also have this imagery of the continued need of Jesus to finish the work, if you will, right? To bring about real clarity. And what a great display for us, brethren, as Jesus' disciples, that we, just like this man, we need to come to Jesus regularly so that we could be able to see clearer and clearer. As we receive truth from the revelation of His Word, as we receive truth from the Spirit of God convicting us and leading us, as we receive that, we need to come regularly to Jesus to be able to see clearer and clearer. So, I just want to say, that's the point that I want you to see that out of this text. But let me make a case to you as to why I think that's also what Mark wants you to see out of this text. Not just my own thoughts, but because I came to this and I read the passage And I felt like, man, I like that imagery. I feel like that fits biblical imagery as a whole and the Christian experience as a whole. And I think you would probably agree with that. But then I started reading the context and I started to think, oh my goodness, I think Mark wants us to look at it like that. I don't think I'm just looking at it like that in my own little world. I think Mark wants us to look at it like that. And so let me tell you why I think that's the case. Because the context that surrounds this story, I think, indicates that Mark wants us to apply these passages in this way. Because Mark places this story right smack in the middle of two other stories that tell a very similar tale. Okay? Mark puts the healing of this blind man as a sandwich, if you will, between two other stories that tell a very similar tale. So on the one hand, in the beginning of Mark chapter 8, you have the feeding of the 4,000. That's what begins chapter 8. So let me just kind of walk you through a little bit of this up till the point I want us to take a look at. But as Mark chapter 8 begins, you have this story, right? The crowds are gathered, they haven't eaten, and Jesus takes compassion on the crowds, and he miraculously feeds these thousands of people, right? And when all of that is said and done, Jesus retreats with his disciples to a different place, and there's a very interesting discussion that takes place between Jesus and his disciples as they're on the boat on the way to this new place. And so look with me here at Mark 8, starting in verse 14. This is now the discussion that takes place, right? So they leave the feeding of the 4,000. They're on the boat, crossing the sea. And listen to what it says, verse 14. Now, they had forgotten to bring bread. So they left all the stuff, right? You remember Jesus feeds these people. He has them collect leftover baskets full, and they get in the boat, and they leave all the food on the shore or wherever. So they had forgotten to bring bread. And they had only one loaf with them in the boat. And he cautioned them, saying, now here's Jesus, watch out, beware of the leaven of the Pharisees and the leaven of Herod. And they began discussing with one another the fact that they had no bread. And Jesus, aware of this, said to them, why are you discussing the fact that you have no bread? Now watch the language. Do you not yet perceive or understand? Are your hearts hardened? Having eyes, do you not see? Having ears, do you not hear? And do you not remember? So notice what's happening here, right? These disciples are having this conversation with Jesus, and Jesus is essentially asking them, guys, are you not seeing things properly? Are you not perceiving? Are you not seeing clearly? I mean, you can see the issue at hand, right? The disciples are not understanding properly. And he says, you're not seeing properly. You have eyes, but you're not seeing properly. Your vision is distorted. Jesus is warning the disciples about the Pharisees and the Sadducees, and the only thing they can think about is, we might go hungry because we don't have any bread. But that's not Jesus' point, right? And brethren, you have to remember, these disciples aren't totally blind here. What have they been doing up to this point where Jesus feeds the 5,000? Is this the first time they've ever encountered Jesus? They've been following Jesus already, right? These disciples, we would call them Christians. We'd call them believers. They've been following Jesus. They've certainly come to know and understand something about Jesus, but they're still not seeing quite clearly. They're certainly not seeing as clearly as they ought to see. And so Jesus, he has to give them some clarity here. He's got to help them to see better. Look at what happens here following chapter 8, we'll read verse 18 again and follow here. He says, having eyes, do you not see? Having ears, do you not hear? And do you not remember? Now he's going to tell them, when I broke the 5 loaves for the 5,000, you remember that? This is just before Jesus feeds the 5,000. He says, when I did that and I fed the 5,000, how many baskets full of broken pieces did I take up? And they said, 12. And the 7 for the 4,000, how many baskets full of broken pieces did you take up? And they said 7. And he said to them, do you not understand? So Jesus is seeking here to take these disciples who definitely have eyes, they definitely have seen something, but their seeing is all messed up here. They're not seeing very clearly. And Jesus is going to come in and he's going to say, I'm going to give you some clarity here. I'm going to give you some teaching, some revelation. I'm going to walk you through this because you're not seeing very clearly. And he helps them to see more clearly. And if you read actually Matthew's account of this event, it's actually a little, no pun here, a little more clear as to what's taking place with these disciples. Listen to this, because this is what happens. Jesus says to them in Matthew, he says, how is it that you fail to understand that I do not speak about bread? Then he quotes again for them. Beware of the leaven of the Pharisees and Sadducees. Now look, this is what it says in Matthew. Then they came to understand that he did not tell them to beware of the leaven of bread, but of the teaching of the Pharisees and the Sadducees. So here you have Jesus, and he's giving them more clarity. He's helping them to see clearer. And the disciples are coming to see more clearly. Oh, okay, he's not talking about bread here. He's talking about the teaching of the Pharisees and the Sadducees. And they're starting to see clearer. And this is the story on one end of the healing of this blind man. So you have on one end, Jesus helping his disciples who are not seeing very clearly to see more clearly. So that's on one end. And then on the other end, we find another situation with the disciples that has a similar theme. Okay, just after Jesus heals this man in verses 22 through 26, we have another interaction with the disciples about who they understand Jesus to be. Okay, in starting in verse 27, if you'd look there, chapter 8, verse 27, Jesus asked them at the end of verse 27, who do people say that I am? Okay, and you have a handful of different answers, of course. Some people say John the Baptist, some people say Elijah, and some people don't know what to say, so they just say, oh, we don't know, he is a prophet of some sort. But then Jesus asked them directly, he asked them clearly in verse 29. But who do you say that I am? Now the question is posed to them as individuals, right? And we could say, brethren, that Jesus is here asking them, right? How do others view me? And how do you view me? How do others see? And how do you see, right? And we know how Peter answers, right? You are the Christ. In Matthew's account, he says, you are the Christ, the Son of the living God. So you come to this scene, and it's like, yes, Peter can see, right? He could see, it would seem, real clearly here, right? He's confessing Jesus as the Christ. And listen, brethren, again, his seeing does not come from himself. You remember again in Matthew's account, it said Jesus says to Peter, right? Flesh and blood did not reveal this to you, but my Father who is in heaven, right? And so, brethren, just think here, right? Even though Peter had already been seeing something of who Jesus is beforehand, it seems now that he sees even much clearer than he saw before. I mean, even just a little bit ago, they were on the boat, not that long ago, crossing the sea, and even just a little bit ago, Peter did not even properly understand Jesus' warning about the teaching of the Pharisees and the Sadducees. You could say he was seeing men as trees walking. He wasn't really seeing very clearly. And here he is confessing Jesus as the promised Messiah. I mean, he's seeing a lot clearer, isn't he? He's definitely seeing much clearer than he was seeing on the boat just a little bit ago. Now, if that's where the story ended, that would already be pretty good. I'd feel pretty comfortable with that. But what takes place after this makes the whole thing even more interesting, right? Another account just following Peter's confession, starting in verse 31. Look at what it says here. This is just after the confession of Jesus as the Messiah. And he began to teach them that the Son of Man must suffer many things and be rejected by the elders and the chief priests and the scribes and be killed, and after 3 days rise again. And he said this plainly. Now, it is interesting here because it's almost as though, when you read the language of what's taking place here, it's almost as though Jesus is now beginning to open up to them further truth, further revelation of what is about to take place. And actually, if you read the Gospels, both in Matthew's account and Mark's account, this is the first time that this comes up. This is the first place where you actually begin to see Jesus teaching them what is going to happen, his sufferings and his death and his resurrection and all those kinds of things. It didn't come up yet. It hadn't come up to this point. Jesus had not taught them this stuff yet. And in fact, again, in probably should just preach out of Matthew's account, but in Matthew's account, it says, it's even clearer because it says, from that time, Jesus began to show his disciples that he must go to Jerusalem and suffer. So it was at this time, it seems that Jesus recognizes that these men who he had been teaching and discipling, they've now come to a point, right? They just confessed me to be the Messiah. All right, now I'm going to start to teach them that the Messiah is going to suffer. It's as though Jesus recognizes they got enough clarity at this point. I'm going to give them more, right? And we're going to give them more teaching, more revelation, more truth here about what is going to happen, what's going to take place. So he does that. He tells them, now I'm going to teach you that I'm going to suffer and die. And what does Peter do with this revelation? Come on, you know. He rebukes him. He rebukes Jesus. So he tells them, he began to teach, I'm going to suffer, I'm going to be rejected, the chief priests, the scribes are going to kill me, 3 days I'm going to rise again. He said this plainly, and Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him. What in the world is going on right here? It is just bizarre. Here's Peter, he's now rejecting the teaching of a suffering Messiah, and Jesus has to call him Satan. I mean, Peter goes... If you just read these two accounts, you're like, Peter, you went from seemingly having 20/20 vision, you were seeing clear, brother, to almost being blind again, it seems. Rebuking Jesus, filled with satanic thoughts. And it's almost like this process begins over again, where Jesus has to come. He's got to help him to see clearer because he's not seeing very clearly, right? And he corrects Peter. Look at starting in verse 33. But turning, seeing his disciples, he rebuked Peter and said, "Get behind me, Satan." Now watch. For you are not setting your mind on the things of God, but on the things of men. So it's like Jesus is like, Peter, the reason why you're not understanding this properly, the reason why your vision was really clear before, and now you're all distorted, you're rebuking the Messiah, You just said I'm the Messiah, and now you're rebuking the Messiah. The reason why you're doing that is because you don't have your mindset on the things of God. You got your mindset on the things of man. You're not seeing very clearly. And brethren, it just seems to me, brethren, that these stories are told in this way, in this succession, for a much deeper reason than, well, they just happened that way. I mean, they did happen that way. I'm not saying they didn't happen that way, but it seems there's a bigger thing going on here than Mark just thinking, well, what happened next? And then what happened next? And we're just going to write what's next. It doesn't really matter whether they're connected or not. I don't think that's really it, brethren. It seems as though Mark is lining these things up in a way, yes, because they happened that way, but because that's exactly what he wants us to see. That's how he wants us to view this passage. That's how he wants us to view all of these events that are taking place, right? That these disciples, brethren, they look very much like this blind man does. They come and they receive some degree of sight, some degree of insight into who Christ is and into who God is. And they come in and they're not blind anymore. They receive some sight, but they have to continue to come so that they can see clearer, and so they can see clearer, and so they can see clearer. And brethren, the thing is, I think that we are quite the same as both of them. Because, brethren, this is the same pattern that shapes all of Christian life. Christian life begins, undoubtedly, it begins with receiving a miracle of sight. I mean, we go from absolute, total darkness to having light, to seeing something, right? And you go through the Bible, brethren, and you find over and over and over again, the writers of Scripture are using that very imagery, coming from blindness to light, from not being able to see to being able to see. They're using this imagery over and over and over again to explain salvation. I mean, that is like the main imagery of salvation throughout the Bible. God tells Peter, if you go to Acts chapter 26, or he tells Paul rather, go to Acts chapter 26. Because God comes to tell Paul that his preaching ministry is going to be for that very purpose, to open the eyes of the blind. Acts 26, this is when Paul is sort of recounting the events of his own salvation and his calling to ministry. And he says in Acts 26, starting in verse 16, this is what was told to Paul. He says, "But rise, stand upon your feet, for I have appeared to you for this purpose, to appoint you as a servant and witness to the things in which you have seen me, and to those in which I will appear to you, delivering you from your people and from the Gentiles, to whom I'm sending you," now watch, "to open their eyes so that they may turn from darkness to light and from the power of Satan to God, that they may receive forgiveness of sins and a place among those who are sanctified by faith in me." I mean, brethren, the language is quite clear, isn't it? Obviously, this is about salvation. It's not about Paul's going to go around opening the eyes of blind men, right? It's about you're going to go and people are going to receive forgiveness of their sins and salvation. And God says you're going to turn them from darkness to light. You're going to open their eyes. This imagery is, I mean, I don't need to harp on this because you guys know this, right? You know that's the imagery of salvation in the Bible. And then Paul, as he carries on his ministry in the world, as he goes out and he preaches and he writes to the church, he continues to use this imagery to speak of salvation. He uses it extensively in 2 Corinthians chapter 3. I want you to go there. 2 Corinthians chapter 3. So, as Paul begins this chapter, he's going to make this comparison a comparison between the old covenant and what it offered and the new covenant and what it offers. And he's going to make a point that in the new covenant, we have a much greater hope. Things are better over here in the new covenant than what we had under the old covenant. But the point he's going to make that's interesting in the second half of chapter 3 and into chapter 4 is not everybody sees this. That's the issue, right? The new covenant is way more glorious, and yet not everybody sees it like that. And this is where he's going to go with this. Look at chapter 3, starting in verse 12. He says, since we have such a hope, right? He's talking about, in this new covenant, we got a great hope, guys. It's way better than the old, right? And since we have such a hope, we are very bold. Not like Moses, who would put a veil over his face so that the Israelites might not gaze at the outcome of what was being brought to an end. So you remember, don't get confused here in some of this language. You remember, Moses goes up, talks to the Lord, or goes in the tabernacle. He comes out, he covers his face because his face was shining, right? And he's saying, in this new covenant, the veil comes off. And then he says, verse 14, but their minds were hardened. Now watch, for to this day, when they, this is the Jewish people, when they read the old covenant, that same veil remains unlifted. They got a covering over their face. They can't see it. They can't see the glory of the new covenant. Now watch. The same veil remains unlifted because only through Christ is it taken away. Only through Christ, brethren, do we come to see clearly. Verse 15, yes, to this day, whenever Moses is read, a veil lies over their hearts. But when one turns to the Lord, the veil is removed. I mean, you get this imagery, right? This is imagery of not being able to see to being able to see, right? The veil is removed. Now, the Lord is the Spirit, and where the Spirit of the Lord is, there is freedom. And we all, now watch where he's going here. We all, with unveiled face, right? This thing's been lifted. We're able to see something here. We all, with unveiled face, beholding the glory of the Lord, are being transformed into the same image from one degree of glory to another. For this comes from the Lord, who is the Spirit. So you have this this progressive imagery, don't you? This is from one degree of glory to another. It's not the veil's lifted, boom, you're glorified. That's not how that works. You're going from one glory to another. You're moving up the chain, right? And where does it come from? It comes from the Lord, who is the Spirit, right? But yeah, you're right. That's fine, right? But the point is, it ain't coming from you. It's coming as you come to God and you behold the glory of Jesus, and you're seeing clearly. You're seeing more clearly. The veil, whatever. I'm going to get to this point in a minute. I'm not going to get ahead of my skis here. Now look where he starts going in chapter 4. Because he's continuing this point. Therefore, having this ministry by the mercy of God, we do not lose heart. But we have renounced disgraceful, underhanded ways. We refuse to practice cunning or to tamper with God's word. But by open statement of the truth, we would commend ourselves to everyone's conscience in the sight of God. So he's saying, look, we got this glorious message. We're coming out. We're proclaiming it clearly. We're not trying to be, in the shadows with this thing. Now watch, verse 3. Even if our gospel is veiled, right? Even if we preach this message and they can't see it, it is veiled to those who are perishing, right? There are people who are still veiled. They can't see. Even if our gospel is veiled, it is veiled to those who are perishing. In their case, the God of this world or age has blinded the minds of unbelievers to keep them from seeing the light of the gospel of the glory of Christ, who is the image of God. Brethren, this is the preeminent image throughout the New Testament of what is happening in salvation. You are going from darkness to light. You are going from being veiled to unveiled, right? No doubt this is what is often described in the Bible as salvation. We know that. But, is that it then? Is it all brought to total completion? Is that the, and maybe I already got ahead of myself here a little bit as I kind of went off there on the glory to glory thing, but is that all? Is it you come to Christ and you could see perfectly clearly and everything has reached full completion? Is that the image that the Bible portrays to you? It's not, brethren. It's not. Now, the image is portrayed to you, and they use it this way for a reason, brethren, because you go from blindness to seeing. You go from darkness to light. You go from veiled to unveiled, and that's fine. Use that imagery. It's great. That's what salvation is. But, brethren, don't be confused thinking that means that now when I'm saved, I see everything perfectly and clearly, and all of it's brought to completion. That's not true. In fact, brethren, if you would remember properly, you would remember that this very man, Paul, who speaks about salvation as going from darkness to light, right? Being veiled to seeing, right? This very man, he writes in 1 Corinthians 13 about the present Christian life. And he says that we see in what way? We see dimly. Now that's interesting. It's very interesting. He says, for now, this is Paul in 1 Corinthians 13, for now we see in a mirror dimly. But then, he's talking about when we now meet the Lord, but then face to face. Now I know in part, then I shall know fully, even as I have been fully known. That's interesting, isn't it? I find that interesting that Paul can speak in these two ways, right? That you would get the impression in reading some of what Paul has to say that when you're saved, boom, you see clearly. You were in darkness and you got total light now. You were veiled, veil's removed, and you got, everything is open to you. You are in a whole new, completed, glorified realm you could see now. But it would seem that if you also understand Paul's view of the present Christian life, that you see dimly, that we're kind of like this man in Mark 8. You can see, but your vision is not yet as clear as it should be. It's quite dim. In fact, again, the very same man, Paul, he will write to the Ephesians. He's going to write to these Christians in Ephesus, and he's going to tell them, I'm praying for you that your eyes would be enlightened. I don't know, maybe you haven't found that very interesting, but it is interesting, again, that Paul he's not praying for lost people. These Ephesians are not lost people. These are Christians. Paul is praying that Christians might see. Isn't that interesting? Have you ever thought about that? That Paul would pray for Christians that they could see better, right? Well, they already see. Well, they do already see, but they could see better. They could see clearer, right? Now, just go there for a minute so you can see this, and we've talked about this a bunch, but this is a useful passage to remember in this regard. Ephesians 1, starting in 15. Again, these are not lost people. He says, for this reason, because I have heard of your faith in the Lord Jesus and your love toward the saints. Again, they got faith, they got love toward the saints. These are Christians. I do not cease to give thanks to you, remembering you in my prayers, that the God of our Lord Jesus Christ, the Father of glory, may give you the spirit of wisdom and of revelation and the knowledge of Him, having the eyes of your hearts enlightened. He wants them to see more light, brethren, that you may know what is the hope to which He has called you, that you may know what is the hope to which He has called you,
What are the riches of his glorious inheritance in the saints? And what is the immeasurable greatness of his power toward us who believe, according to the working of his great might? But then, do you think these Christians knew anything about this stuff already? Yes. I mean, they had to have, right? You got to know. You can't be a Christian and not have your eyes open at all. You're not a Christian. If you're totally in darkness, you don't have your eyes enlightened at all. You're totally dark, right? You think they knew something of the hope to which he has called them? They certainly knew something of that, right? You think they knew something of the riches of their glorious inheritance? They knew something of that. Paul had already preached this stuff to them. They knew something of it, right? They knew something of the power of God working in them. Yeah, they knew something of that. And yet Paul is coming, he's saying, guys, I want you to see. I want you to know the power of God. And they're like, Paul, we do see. No, I want you to see better. I want you to know more of the power of God. I want you to have your eyes more enlightened. I want you to see more. I want you to know more. And brethren, I find this such a glorious truth, because no matter how much progress you make in the Christian life, you will always find that if you come to Jesus again and again, that you will always be made to see clearer and clearer. I don't, sometimes it's hard for me to remember some of the things I thought or felt as I was a young Christian. But I know I've talked to a few of you, and some of you have made similar statements about, I just can't wait till I have been a Christian for a long time and I'm there. It's like, man, you just never get there. I've never gotten there. I don't feel like anybody I know has ever gotten where they're like, feel like I'm there. I feel like I got there, wherever there was, I feel like I'm there. And brethren, I find over the years that there are times when I look back and man, I thought I saw real clear. And I realized that I was seeing trees. And I thought I was seeing men, but they were trees. And there were little pockets in there, confessing Jesus is Christ, and then I'm over here rebuking the Messiah. And you just realize in this Christian life that you think you see clear at times, and then you realize, man, I'm not seeing so clear here. I feel like I need more clarity. And brethren, that has just been my own Christian experience, and I don't doubt that it's been yours. And brethren, listen, I want to encourage you with something here. I want to encourage you with this is important. I want you encouraged by this. Some of you here, maybe even all of you here, have probably thought at times, I'm not seeing so well. In fact, maybe you've thought, I might be blind. I don't know if I'm seeing really well at all. I'm trying to do this Christian life, and I'm not seeing real clearly. I'm bumping into things. I'm getting bruised up real bad. And you start to wonder, the question enters in, whether or not you ever received the miracle of sight. And I want to just say, brethren, that there is no danger in you recognizing that your vision is distorted and that maybe you only see men as trees walking. In fact, brethren, and this is the encouragement I want you to have, even if you see spiritual realities in a way that's quite distorted, the fact that you see them at all is an indication that a miracle has taken place in your life. The fact that you see at all is an indication that God has done something to you. Because, brethren, before, you didn't see anything of it. You were totally blind. And maybe now, you see some things. You see some things of the glory of God and the glory of Christ. You're seeing some things, but maybe you're quite confused as to what they are, what they might be, how they work together. What does any of this even mean? You're seeing things, but you're confused about it. And you know what, brethren? That's okay. That's actually encouraging. It's a sign of a miracle when you see men as trees walking. It's a sign of a miracle when you're seeing some spiritual realities and you're like, I don't know what any of this means. I don't know what to do with any of this. And I'm not seeing so clearly, but I'm seeing something different. Brethren, it's an indication of spiritual life. There's a sign of a miracle there. There's no danger, brethren. But what you need to do is continue to come to Jesus, that He would help you to see clearer. That's what you need. The danger lies when people begin to think that they don't need to see any clearer. The danger lies when people think that they've already had perfectly clear vision and they don't need God for any more clarification. And you know what? Jesus writes to a church like this in the book of Revelation. You can go there if you want. Revelation chapter 3, the church at Laodicea. This is a scathing rebuke of Jesus to this church. Revelation 3, starting in verse 14, it says, "To the angel of the church in Laodicea write, the words of the Amen, the faithful and true witness, the beginning of God's creation. I know your works," he says. "You are neither cold nor hot. Would that you were either cold or hot. So because you are lukewarm and neither hot or cold, I will spit you out of my mouth." Now watch. "For you say," this is what they say about themselves. "You say, I am rich, I have prospered, and I need nothing, not realizing that you are wretched, pitiable, poor, blind, and naked. I counsel you to buy from me gold refined by fire, so that you may be rich, and white garments, so that you may clothe yourself, and the shame of your nakedness may not be seen, and salve to anoint your eyes, so that you may see." Notice the rebuke towards these people, brethren. This is a sad sight, because these people are convinced that they already see. These people are convinced that they already know. They already have it all. But the truth is, Jesus considers them blind. You can't see. You think you see, but you don't see. But even here, brethren, I find it so encouraging that Jesus comes and He offers them help, doesn't He? He says, "Come to me, that you may see. Come to me, get some ointment for your eyes, so that you can see." He doesn't, even as awful as this is, He doesn't cast them off. He says, "Come to me so that I can help you to see." You think you see, you don't see, you're blind. But if you come to me, I will help you to see, right? And brethren, you could really think of this as the constant refrain of Jesus in the Christian life, isn't it? Come to me that you may see. And then, come again, that you would see. And come again, that you would see. And come again, that you would see. Because, brethren, never on this side of glory, and I would think maybe on the other side, but never on this side, will you ever see as perfectly clearly as you could see or as you ought to see. But you can see clearer. You can definitely come to see clearer. So I'll just close with these words here, brethren. I've come to see this passage in Mark 8 as such an encouragement to my own soul. Again, as I said in the beginning, this text, I would read it and it just puzzled me. I was just confused all the time when I would read this passage. But it has become, over this last week and a half or so, a place of such relatability with this man. Because, again, as you read the story, you find that these disciples are just like this man. And I find that I'm just like this man. And hopefully, you see, whether you know it or not, that you're just like this man too. This man portrays the whole of the Christian life in such a wonderful way. And again, did Mark intend it, that application? Well, I don't know. I can't be certain of that. But I can say he sure made it look like that's what he was wanting to do there. But either way, brethren, I hope that you find it an encouraging passage for your souls. I mean, every time you come and read this text, I want you to come and have it be a reminder of the necessity for Jesus to continue to finish the work in you. The work that He began in you, right? He began something in you, brethren. He's done a miracle. He's taken you, and the language is fine, right? He's taken you from darkness to light. But brethren, there's still work to be done there. And Jesus is doing it, and He wants to do it in you. Let it be a reminder of the necessity for you to come to see clearer and clearer the things of God. And even more so, the willingness of Jesus to bring you to a place where you see clearer and clearer.